I was caught off guard when my husband, Jonathan, suddenly suggested I move back to my parents' house, despite the fact that they were already living with us. His unexpected declaration left me in disbelief, yet he seemed to think it was a perfectly rational request. He bluntly asked, "Do you have a problem with that? Don't argue with me. I'm fine with divorcing you if you do." Jonathan's recent behavior had been cold and distant, and I had my share of grievances. I had even contemplated divorce myself, but it felt unjust for him to push me out of our home. I couldn't help but think, I'm the one covering $3,200 of our expenses. Does he even realize that? As I stood there in shock, he grew increasingly agitated, demanding, "Leave this house now. My parents won't feel comfortable with you here." I couldn't comprehend why I needed to leave, but I reluctantly agreed. "All right, I'll take all my belongings with me." As soon as I acquiesced, a smirk crossed his face, and he said, "Then do it," before turning on his heel and walking away. Without wasting a moment, I contacted a store to sell my things. "My name is Betty, and I've been living with Jonathan, who is 3 years older than I am. We met through mutual friends, and what started as a casual introduction blossomed into a full day spent together." Jonathan shared his dreams of becoming a voiceover artist, and I was instantly drawn to his rich, resonant voice. I've always had a weakness for soothing tones. It seemed the attraction was mutual. We exchanged numbers and soon began planning more outings. Our relationship developed effortlessly, almost as if we had never needed to define it. I had just graduated from college when we met, and dating someone with more life experience, like Jonathan, was exhilarating. My friend Laura voiced concerns about our 3-year age gap, but I reassured her it wasn't an issue. I genuinely liked Jonathan, and I could feel his affection in return, so I wasn't worried. Eventually, Laura came to trust my judgment. After 2 years together, Jonathan finally brought up marriage. I had already discussed him with my parents, including his age, and they were eager to meet him, harboring high hopes for our future. I often pondered when he would propose, and it happened during one of his routine visits to my apartment. We were lounging, enjoying each other's company, not the most romantic atmosphere, but it was typical of Jonathan, and I was perfectly fine with it. When he popped the question, I simply replied, "Sure, let's get married." Perhaps we both approached the idea with a casual mindset. After the proposal, we took turns visiting each other's families. However, I didn't quite connect with Jonathan's family. His parents' home felt decorated in a style that tried too hard to evoke a sense of old-fashioned luxury, but it came off as insincere. They were dressed in expensive outfits and adorned with flashy jewelry, projecting an air of affluence that felt forced. Our tastes and values seemed miles apart, making me doubt our compatibility. During the visit, Jonathan's mother made a hurtful remark about my appearance, which left me reeling. I was taken aback by the behavior of the family of the man I was about to marry. Nevertheless, I reminded myself that I was committing to Jonathan, not his family. I reassured myself that if I didn't particularly enjoy his parents' company, I wouldn't have to spend much time with them. With that thought, I resolved not to let it trouble me too deeply. After our wedding, as we settled into our new condo, I noticed Jonathan seemed unusually preoccupied. One day, he abruptly asked, "Hey, who was that woman in the blue dress at our wedding, with several guests wearing blue?" I couldn't immediately identify who he meant. "Which woman in a blue dress?" I asked, racking my brain. "You know, the one who gave a speech as your best friend," he clarified. Suddenly, it clicked. "Are you talking about Laura?" I responded, realizing she had worn a blue dress. "Yes, that's her," Jonathan said, his tone betraying some unease. "What's wrong with Laura?" I asked, puzzled by his sudden concern. "Oh, it's nothing important," he dismissed. "The other day, I thought I saw someone who looked like her while I was on my way to work. It just reminded me she's your best friend. I found Jonathan's sudden interest in Laura a bit baffling, but before I could dig deeper, he chuckled and retreated to his room. Not long after that conversation, Laura called, brimming with excitement. "Listen, Betty, my boyfriend is coming back to Canada next year," she exclaimed. Laura and her boyfriend had been dating since childhood. He had moved away in middle school, but they kept their connection alive through letters and eventually reconnected in high school when he confessed his feelings for her. "I've always loved Laura's romantic stories," I said, smiling at the thought of their journey. "Do you think he might propose when he gets back?" She wondered excitedly. "And then you guys will get married?" I teased. Laura laughed. "Oh, Betty, you're always jumping ahead. Just make sure to invite me to the wedding. I promise I'll give another heartfelt speech." "Of course. After the beautiful speech you gave at my wedding, you have to do the same at yours. Just don't set the bar too high." We shared a laugh, sipping our tea and basking in the ease of our conversation. We had always been there for each other, ready to listen whenever one of us faced a challenge. Around this time, I began to notice changes in Jonathan's routine. He started coming home later and later. One evening, I asked, "Working late again today?" "Yeah, you think I shouldn't be working or something?" He shot back defensively. Even after our marriage, Jonathan remained committed to his dream of becoming a voiceover artist. He juggled part-time jobs to fund his voice training, but all his earnings were funneled straight into his classes, leaving me to cover all our living expenses. This situation made it hard for us to save any money together. As time passed, it became increasingly clear that Jonathan was unwilling to compromise on his aspirations for our financial stability. My concern grew as he clocked excessive hours at his part-time job, adding to our financial strain. "Hey, haven't you been working too much lately? They shouldn't be making you do so much overtime, even for a part-time job," I suggested one day. "I told you. I'm fine. More money is always better. Just keep your opinions to yourself," Jonathan snapped. By then, he had grown distant, no longer even using my name when we spoke. Since our marriage, he had taken to addressing me simply as you. I had hoped for more kindness and frequent conversations, but instead, his words had turned harsh. His once gentle voice had become rougher, and his drinking had noticeably increased. At times, he sounded hoarse, which was concerning since a healthy voice is crucial for voice artists. Yet, he showed no interest in discussing his health and seemed to avoid conversations with me altogether. Eventually, he began to ignore me completely, even when we were in the same room. Amidst these difficulties, Laura called, mentioning she had something important to discuss. Eager for a conversation, I suggested we meet up. We decided on a cafe with a private seating area. Laura carefully selected our booth, a spot where the counter and staff could easily see anyone approaching from the door. "You chose this room specifically?" I asked, noticing her cautious demeanor. "Yes," she replied. "I wanted to be able to see if there's a suspicious person outside." "A suspicious person? Is that related to what you wanted to talk about?" I asked, starting to connect the dots. Laura nodded, her expression tense. She explained that ever since she left her job about a month ago, she felt as though someone was following her and even sensed she was being watched on her days off. The reason she picked a booth with a clear view was that she suspected the person stalking her might try to eavesdrop on our conversation. "Did you talk to the police about it?" I asked, concerned. "I tried, but since there hasn't been any direct contact, they can't do much," she sighed. "What about your boyfriend? Isn't he coming back next month?" I inquired, hoping she had support. "I thought I'd discuss it with him too, but I wanted to talk to you first, someone nearby," she explained. I understood her need for immediate support. Laura hadn't managed to get a clear view of her stalker. making the situation all the more unnerving. She was too frightened to determine whether her stalker was a man or a woman. I decided to discreetly keep an eye out from a distance to try and identify who was following her. During this time, I struggled with my troubled relationship with Jonathan, finding it difficult to open up about my own issues. However, as I kept watch, I made a shocking discovery. The person shadowing Laura was none other than my husband. Jonathan often claimed he had to work late, but I noticed that after his shifts, he lingered near Laura's workplace, following her as she left. I was stunned to realize that the person causing my best friend such fear was my husband. Watching Jonathan track Laura with a creepy, unsettling grin completely transformed my perception of the man I had married. The love I thought would last forever suddenly felt cold, and the man I had fallen in love with now seemed like a stranger. I knew I had to tell Laura the truth, urging her to move immediately for her safety. With the help of her colleagues, she arranged for someone to drive her from the underground parking lot directly to her new residence. We took every precaution to ensure her safety. As Laura made her escape, Jonathan's frustration intensified. Eventually, his pent-up anger erupted. "My parents are going to live here, so you need to go back to your parents' house," he demanded abruptly one day. I was taken aback by his sudden and unreasonable ultimatum. "If you have a problem with that, then I'm fine with divorcing you," he threatened, losing his temper. Although I had my grievances and had even considered divorce before, the reality of our deteriorating relationship hit me hard at that moment. I couldn't believe that Jonathan thought he could just kick me out of our home. After all, I was the one paying $3,200 for our monthly expenses. I wondered if he even remembered that as I gave him a skeptical look, but he just snapped. "Just leave already. My parents can't move. And if you're still here, why do I have to leave? I don't understand at all." Despite my confusion and frustration, I tried to stand my ground. I calmly replied, "Okay, I'll take everything I bought with me." Seeing me agree, Jonathan impatiently told me to hurry up and walked away. I immediately contacted a local buyback service, and the next day they arrived at our apartment. At first, Jonathan smirked, thinking I was simply packing to leave. However, his smirk faded into shock as he watched the workers evaluate all our furniture and appliances. Once they finished, a staff member handed me a quote. "The total value is $299,000. they said. I quickly signed off. "Okay, sell it all." Suddenly, Jonathan snapped back to reality and grabbed my arm. "Why are you selling everything? My parents are going to live here. How can they if there's no furniture?" I shook off his grip and countered, "What do you mean? When we got married, you told me you were broke because you were paying for your acting classes. You asked me to handle the rent, furniture, and living expenses. I never knew you were that broke. Remember the $3,200 I've been covering every month? From now on, you'll pay that. And with your parents moving in, I bet it'll be even more." Jonathan went pale, realizing the gravity of the situation. He attempted to regain his composure quickly. "You thought talking about money would make me cancel the divorce? Who do you think you are? I've already gotten close to a rich lady," he said, striking a pose. However, I remembered how Jonathan had been following Laura recently. If he considered that getting close, then his perceptions were deeply flawed. Laura, who came from a wealthy family, her grandfather a businessman and her father his successor, never flaunted her wealth. She lived just like me and our friends, not judged by her family's financial status. Yet it seemed Jonathan had learned of Laura's background and viewed her as a better match, thinking perhaps that wealth made one person preferable over another. This notion infuriated me, but I knew Laura would never be interested in Jonathan. She had been with her high school boyfriend for years, and he was due back in the States soon, with plans for them to marry. When I mentioned that Laura felt uneasy because someone had been stalking her daily, Jonathan was taken aback upon hearing that Laura found him creepy and that they weren't close. I always walked Laura home, he protested. You're lucky I didn't call the police, I replied sharply. But I didn't know she had a boyfriend. He's been away. She picked me over someone she doesn't know. Jonathan tried to justify his misunderstanding of their relationship. They've been writing letters since they were kids and talk almost every day. And unlike you, who's only had part-time jobs, her boyfriend is successful. Even her dad likes him, I pointed out. Jonathan looked profoundly sad as I laid out the facts. It was clear that his delusions about forming a relationship with Laura were just that, delusions, and the reality was setting in hard. As people arrived to take our belongings, he appeared somewhat relieved. I guess you're all I've got now. You'll always support my dream of becoming a voiceover artist, won't you? He asked, trying to seem unfazed. I responded with a steely gaze. Sorry, I've already begun divorce proceedings. We should communicate through our lawyers from now on. Jonathan, perhaps thinking I still had feelings for him, clung to me. Don't say that. Haven't we been getting along all this while? Getting along? Ever since you discovered my best friend Laura is wealthy. You've become distant and started spending time with her right after our wedding. I realized then that I had made a mistake. Jonathan broke down in tears. Despite being older, his childish weeping made him even less endearing to me. I could no longer bear to be near him. Enough, I snapped. I've also informed your uncle about the divorce. You know he's a tough man. Well, he's decided you'll work for him, which means I can no longer support your voice artist dreams. You barely practice as it is. It might be time to accept reality and stay away from Laura, or I'll call the police. With those final words, I left, determined not to look back. For now, I would stay with my parents, though I considered moving closer to my workplace if I found a suitable place. Meanwhile, Jonathan ended up working for his uncle. As predicted, his parents, who had plans to rely on him financially after his marriage to Laura, also moved in with him, all working for the uncle. It seemed that exploiting others was a family trait. I felt relieved to escape that toxic environment. Age wasn't the significant factor. I vowed to be more cautious in choosing my next partner. On a happier note, after settling things with Jonathan, Laura invited me to her wedding. She introduced me to her long-term boyfriend, and I genuinely wished them happiness.